The FTC case against Amazon goes to trial next year. Why is this a historic moment?
This is a once in a generation opportunity to actually hold Amazon accountable and to break its control over the online market. We're now 30 years into e-commerce, and we have one company that utterly dominates with about 50% of all sales and an even higher share in lots of everyday categories. And the reason for that is that Amazon, has a lot of ways and a lot of tactics to monopolize the market. And it's really impossible for other competitors to come along and get any breathing room. And so this case actually targets that problem. It targets sort of the root of all the other problems that we have with Amazon.
Yeah, so tell me the mechanics of the case against Amazon. What's the FTC going after?
Yeah, so the case, and it's brought by both the FTC and 17 states, so it's a joint federal state case. The case says that Amazon has monopoly power over both the market for consumers, but also over the market for sellers. That basically, if you're a business and you need to sell online, which is most consumer product businesses, you really have little choice but to rely on Amazon. And Amazon uses that power to squeeze sellers and vendors for these high fees, and it earns incredible monopoly profits on that fee revenue. And then it uses that revenue to systematically engage in predatory pricing, to sell certain goods and services below cost in order to prevent other competitors from being able to come into that market, competitors that can't afford to lose money indefinitely and therefore get locked out of the market. It really takes aim at the whole underlying structure of Amazon's business model. It identifies these anti-competitive tactics that Amazon is using, but really argues that there's a kind of infinite number of anti-competitive tactics, that if you have this kind of structural control over your competitors and businesses that depend on you, you kind of have an endless array of ways in which to exercise that control, to undermine competition, and to exploit those businesses and ultimately consumers, because all of this results in higher prices for everybody and also fewer options about where to shop.
I've always said that controlling the consumer marketplace and the platform is like Amazon is a player in the game and also the referee. So it can really tilt the game to an unfair advantage because of this monopoly power. So say this case is successful and Amazon is found guilty. How do you think it would change the e-commerce market?
Well, at a minimum, it would lead to rules about how Amazon behaves. So, for example, right now, Amazon says to sellers, you cannot charge lower prices on other sites effectively. And so a seller that, they're on another site with lower fees, lower costs, or they want to draw more consumers to that other site, they're not able to. Like, they are not able to pass along those savings and help build up business elsewhere. Amazon really prevents that. And so that's one of the kinds of behaviors that this case could stop. Another example is that Amazon essentially requires, if you're going to win the buy box and actually get sales, requires sellers to use its shipping and fulfillment service. Even though many of them would prefer to use UPS or the Postal Service or something else, they're kind of locked into that. And once they're locked into Amazon's warehousing, that means that, they're kind of reliant on Amazon to do all their shipping, even if they're trying to sell on other sites. And that becomes very difficult. And so again, it suppresses their ability to effectively sell through other channels. So those are some of the kinds of behaviors that could be outlawed by this case. The other thing that this case could lead to is a breakup of Amazon. And in fact, if you look at how this case is articulated, it seems really designed to do that, because it talks about this integration of shipping, retail, the marketplace, and the kind of interplay and leverage that Amazon gets from combining all of those things into one place. And that suggests to me that this case is really designed to actually address that underlying problem by spinning off those businesses into separate standalone companies. That would be, in my view, the way to really solve Amazon's monopoly. It would really open up the market in all of these different areas and allow other platforms, other sites to become competitive. And then, small businesses, consumer product companies would have options about where to sell, and consumers would have options about where to shop. And that competition, in turn, would discipline Amazon. It would mean that Amazon spun off companies didn't have the same power to exploit sellers, to exploit their workers, to exploit consumers that they have today.
It does sound like a huge opportunity to really address some of the structural causes of what Amazon is doing to the marketplace and to small businesses. Are there forces or are there things that could happen to get in the way of this having a favorable outcome?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of hurdles along the way, but the most significant one is, we have a real fear that the FTC, that the Trump administration will drop this case or decide to enter into a very weak settlement with Amazon. That one day they'll just say, hey, we have a deal with Amazon, we're going to settle this case. And the terms of the settlement will be nothing, pennies on the dollar, no actual meaningful changes in Amazon's behavior. We've seen this happen with the Trump administration. In fact, we just saw it recently with the Live Nation case, another big monopolization case, where at the 11th hour, the Trump administration's like, hey, we settled with Live Nation, we're all done here, and there were no real changes in the company's business model. So that's a big fear that we have. The good thing is that there are 17 states signed on to this case, and those states can continue the case on their own without the FTC, which is exactly what we saw happen in the Live Nation case. That resulted in a monopoly verdict. And so we're hoping to see it in the Amazon case as well. But these cases are really expensive, and state AGs don't have the same kind of budget that the federal government does. And so I think it's really important for AGs to understand how crucial this case is and how much it's needed by businesses in their states.
I'm a former small business owner. I know what it feels like to watch all this happen and to feel how Amazon makes it so much harder to do the job of running a small business. What can I do as a small business owner to try to push for a favorable outcome in this case?
The first step is we've got a sign-on letter, and we are bringing in hundreds of businesses across the country to sign on to this letter, and we're going to distribute the letter to the 17 state attorneys general and to the FTC as well. You can find the letter on smallbusinessrising.net, so that's the Small Business Rising Coalition. If you search for that, you'll find a link to the website and a sign-on form for that letter. And not only sign on, but it'd be great if you can think about 3 or 4 businesses in your community that you know and forward it on to them. I think the bigger the showing of support we can get, the better. And the letter basically says, here's why this is so crucial, that in a market that is increasingly online, if Amazon controls that, there are lots of brick and mortar small businesses across all of our states that are going to be locked out of the future of retail, locked out of the future of where the market is going. And that's just untenable. We have to address this monopoly problem. So it's really important for state attorneys general. They hear about a lot of issues. They got a lot of things going on. They need to know about the importance of this case for people in their states.
Yeah, it'll be hard for those state AGs to ignore a critical mass of small business owners explaining how important this is to them.